I'm Greg Garbos of Four Season Tools. We're here at City Bitty Farm and the headquarters of Four Season Tools in Kansas City, Missouri. Today is an exciting day on the farm because we're going to be installing a modular high tunnel. There's a lot of big, large movable buildings that are out there that people are using for year-round vegetable growing and season extension, as well as movable buildings for pasturing animals. The average building we sell is a 30 by 48 or roughly 1,500 square feet. What we're going to be doing today is installing a 12 foot by 12 foot modular tunnel at only about 144 square feet. But for this small backyard garden, it's actually a really nice size. These modular tunnels are actually little modules or domes, and we can go ahead and we can split up or even string them together to use them for different purposes. We're actually going to be putting eventually 3 in here, covering the beds behind me, and then we're going to string them together. We can take 2 of these 12 foot by 12 foot domes, and instead of pushing them together to get a 24 foot structure, we can actually put in a 4 foot connector and end up with a 12 foot by 28 foot dome, or continue that pattern. We can even go a couple hundred feet. So it's kind of similar to what people refer to as a caterpillar tunnel, except they're individual modules that can be separated out. For us, because we're vegetable growers here, we're going to be using them for vegetable production and to expand our growing season, but they also have a lot of other uses. So say that we had 100 feet of these things strung together, we can break them out, use part of them for season extension with vegetables, or maybe we'll put another one over our compost pile to keep it from freezing so we still have access to the compost in the winter. Or maybe we can actually put them over hay storage or equipment storage so we have dry storage with the buildings. And that's kind of the whole concept of these modular buildings, is that they're individual pods that can get strung together into long buildings, or they can get separated out and moved and used for different purposes. We're now going to talk about some of the parts and tools that are needed to build these modular grow domes. As far as the tools are concerned, the primary tool we're going to use is an impact. We've got a lot of the 18-volt DeWalt impacts, and then we use 2 different bits. One is a 5/16 magnetic bit, and that's going to work with a lot of the different self-tapping screws that we use. Then we get an impact adapter from the 1/4 inch impact. In our case, is a 3/8 inch drive, but we are using a 1/2 inch deep socket. So we're using a 1/2 inch deep socket with 3/8 drive, a 3/8 adapter for the impact, and then it allows us to quickly change between these bits in the impact. We're going to use a lot of basically bolts and screws to put these things together, so this is definitely going to be the primary tool. If your site is starting off as level, if you've got a good site, you can either use levels to try to get things correct, but one of the things that I think is easiest to use is actually a right angle, a square. When you're using this tool, we care a lot more about making sure that everything's built kind of at a right angle. These domes are going to be picked up and moved around, so it's potential that one site might have different slope than another. So we really find this to be the most useful tool, especially when connecting the skids to the hoops to make sure that everything is actually at a right angle. If you are not building a dome on skids, but instead pounding the ground posts into the ground, you'd be using a ground post driver. It's a solid piece of round metal. It goes in the top of the pipe, and then it allows you with a sledgehammer to pound the pipe into the ground without damaging the top of the pipe. Now we're going to talk about some of the different hardware components that are going to be used within the structure. We have brace bands. This 1 3/8 inch brace band is designed to go sleeve over the pipe, and then with a 5/16 bolt it will get tightened down. So we use the 1/2 inch socket, will come down and will tighten down these brace bands. The brace bands will be used everywhere where we're connecting either the horizontal pipe in the hoop or the collar tie, or we'll also use them for the corner bracing. This allows us to have the brace band on whatever we're attaching to, and allows us to pivot the different braces however we want before we go ahead and tighten them down. It's also worth mentioning that on this brace band there's actually a square hole inside of it for the bolt, and that's why the carriage bolts work really nice, because they actually have a square thing inside of their heads. So when they're in and it's all the way nestled, you can just go ahead with an impact and sink the nut down on one side without needing that second wrench. The other thing that will actually use the same bolts is these things called end rail clamps. They come in 2 halves to make a pair and then a bolt. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to take 2 pieces of metal and actually secure them together at a right angle. So just as an example, these 2 pipes that I just happen to have, puts them together, we tighten the nut down, and this works really well. It's not a super strong joint, so it's important to come back, and I would actually put probably 4 screws in each side, 2 in each pipe, so 8 screws total to really kind of try to strengthen up that joint. Then the pieces that have to do with the anchoring, we use the same 1 3/8 inch brace bands and these welded rings. This curved piece is actually a ski tip, so our skid will be come in here, and we'll have this welded ring on the ends of the ski tip. We'll have one on each side, and what this does is allow us to have a ring that's going to help us with the anchoring. We can then take the T-posts that come with the building and we drive them in. They're going to be able to drive through the welded rings. You'll notice that T-posts come with these flattened spots on it. That helps for when you're using this for trees or whatever to kind of help them from twisting in the ground. We go ahead and cut these off or knock them off with a sledgehammer. You can kind of cut off the sides, and that allows it to easily go through the welded rings. I've also seen people just cut the posts, shorten them off, but we do want to try to get these in as deep as we can. As far as the hoops themselves, you'll see that there are several different pieces that make up the hoops. One of the primary pieces is this sidewall hoop. It's straight for a while, and then it's got a curve, and then it's swaged on one end. This pipe can be bought, and you can buy a bender to go ahead and actually curve your own pipe. But the swages, you can actually go to Home Depot or Lowe's or one of those big box stores and actually get 1 3/8 top rail that actually comes pre-swaged. Then we've got various lengths of straight pieces that will go up and make up the hoop. And at the top, we've got this ridge connector. The ridge connector is swaged, again pinched on both ends, so that the straight pieces come in both sides. And then there's this larger ring on the top that's big enough that it can sleeve down the straight pipes. So if the building's on skids, you'd have a purlin, or a pipe that runs the length of the structure, going through the top of the hoops, and then you also have them on the bottom that actually make up the skids. If you've got ski tips, you'd go ahead and you would put these ski tips in. They can go ahead and sleeve over the swages of the skids, or you can actually use splices so that these can connect into the non-swaged end of the skids. Another tool that's very helpful to have is, and something that's really easy to make, is what's something called a spacer board. This is actually designed for 6-foot spacing and notched out for the hoops. But you can go ahead, if these are going to be built at 4-foot hoop spacing, you can make sure that you have 2 notches in a board at 4-foot hoop spacing. That way when you're building it, you're making sure that things are at a right angle. You can sleeve this between 2 hoops, and without measuring, you know your hoop spacing is correct. If you're trying to get 4 hoops into a 12-foot purlin, you might actually want to shrink that spacing down just a hair. You can pull the 2 end wall ones in, or you can kind of sheet them all about an inch closer to each other, because what you do when you do 4-foot centers is you start at 0, you're going to end up being at 0 on the other end, and the brackets are going to stick past the skids. So it can make more sense to kind of either pinch in the outer hoops, or actually set that spacing more like 3 feet 11 inches as opposed to 4 feet. Once the frame is up, the other thing that we're going to use to attach the plastic is this plastic attachment channel, and also plastic attachment wire. Plastic attachment channel can come with 1 or 2 channels inside of it, so this is single plastic attachment channel, and this is plastic attachment wire. Sometimes it's also called spring wire. This can be screwed in with self-tapping screws about once every foot on your end walls to secure the plastic, and then it actually can be bent and flexed over curves. So if we were to try to put this piece of plastic on this curve, it would be best to go ahead and screw the plastic to the sidewall hoop on the bottom. Then you can flex the long end to curve it over, and you can use clamps as you go, effectively curving it all the way up to the top. So now that we kind of understand what all the different parts are, we're going to talk about how the structure actually goes together. We're going to talk about the specific components and the assembly required, the actual steps to build the hoops for these structures. So if you look around me, there's a couple things that are helpful to see. Behind me to the right, that's already a grow dome, or one of these modular tunnels that's already been assembled. That one is 12 feet wide. You can see the 30-inch beds and drip system that's inside of it. It's got scissor doors, and on the front corner is the anchoring, where you've got T-posts that are banged in at an X to help with the vertical. So to build these hoops, what we're going to do is actually make kind of a template. The way that we did this here is we have this nice concrete pad, so we can make sure that we build them all flat. If you build them up at like on a table, or shim everything up to a working level, you want to be very, very careful that you don't build anything that's twisted. So if you want to, you can start by leveling out a working surface, but make sure that it's level everywhere. You could have something that's kind of level over here and over there, and then the top be twisted down. So a nice big flat surface. It's wide enough for this, the hoops that we're building. In this case, in front of me is a 15-foot wide hoop. At the bottom of the hoops, we went ahead and lined it up there's a nice clean edge on this concrete, so we went ahead and lined it up with the bottom edge. That way the bottom edge is lined up on both sides. All the pieces are together, we're flat, and the hoops are lined up on the bottom, and then we come through and we put self-tapping screws down in all of the joints. Everywhere the two pieces are swatched together. Before we actually screw them together, we assemble the pieces, it's always easier to slide the bands on. So when we were doing, and we have a time-lapse video of doing this, is we were kind of putting a lot of the sides of these pieces together, sliding the brace bands on, coming up, connecting the hoops, screwing the whole thing together. When you have your first hoop built, and again, the bottom edges of the hoop are lined up with the concrete, we now have a nice template for what these are going to look like. So what we did is we put our truss in with a 15-foot wide, we put the 6-foot wide truss in, and we measured from the bottom edge of the concrete all the way up to both sides of the truss. And we wanted to make sure that when this was assembled that the truss was straight, so it would end up being parallel to the ground as opposed to tilted in one side or the other. Structurally, it probably doesn't make that much of a difference, but aesthetically, when you're in a building that has a lot of hoops and your eyes are looking down the length of the building, you can really see something that's a little bit off. It's okay if once the building is up, something doesn't look right and you adjust it. So we do try to put these things in quick, and making this jig and this template is the way that we do that. So when this brace is in, we went ahead and we marked a line, we scored a line actually right on the concrete on the bottom. And then as we were building them, we just lined all of our collar ties up and made sure these little trusses were actually parallel to that line, and it was really, really fast to build these. We built about 10 hoops. It took us about 35 minutes once we kind of had everything set up and ready to go. So we're now going to talk about how to stand the structure. We've already talked about how all the hoops go together, so all these assemblies are already built and ready to go. First thing that we did is we laid down the skids. We made sure that the site is how we wanted it to be. In this case, we've got a 12-foot dome that's straddling 3 30-inch beds. We went ahead and we did some of our own adjustments. What's nice about how this is designed is that the roof pieces can be any length you want them to be. So we actually decided to pinch this structure in a little bit more and ended up actually cutting all of our roof hoops to kind of customize our width a little bit. So a 12-foot structure could really be shrunk down, probably even to a 10-foot or so, and even the 15-foot structure can be massaged down as well. We have another 15-foot grow dome on the property, and we did exactly that. We actually shrunk it from 15 feet to 14 feet, and that really matched our 30-inch bed system really well because we were trying to use 2 low tunnels inside of that 15-foot wide building. So, anyways, whatever your width is, all of the hoops are constructed, and all of the skids are laid down. We tried to make sure that when the skids were laid down, that they were actually laid down so that they were square. We don't want to build a parallelogram. So the easiest way to do that is to get them where you want them to be, measure the width in between the skids to make sure it's consistent, and then you can also measure the diagonals. If the diagonals of the square are equal, then you know you're building a square or a rectangle as opposed to a parallelogram. So our skids are in place and all of our hoops are built. Then we came and we started to attach the hoops to the skids. Using these 1 3/8 inch brace bands, it's always easier to put the brace bands on the hoops and on the skid ahead of time. You can open these up and then pinch them back down with pliers or tongue and groove pliers, but it's always easier to slide the bands on. So what we did is we slid the band on for the sidewall corner brace on the hoop, and we slid the band on for the sidewall corner brace for the skid. Next, we used the end rail clamps on the bottom where the two connect at a T, and we used the right angles. We made sure that this was at a right angle. We had 2 of us doing it, made sure it was at the right angle, and then went ahead with the impact and tightened the end clamp down. we're going to go ahead and build everything and then come back and add all the screws to the hardware in case we want to do any adjusting. Now that we know this is basically at a right angle, we immediately then put in the sidewall corner brace. This acts as an extra set of hands to make sure that this is a nice right angle corner and helps support that first hoop. After this side was done, we went over to the other side and we repeated the process, connecting the hoop to the skid with the end rail clamps. We slid the brace bands on ahead of time and then put on the sidewall corner braces with both of the brace bands. It is worth mentioning that on the brace bands, we made sure that the bolts are facing into the structure. We want to do that, we want the bolts to face in because we don't want them to have any risk of tearing the plastic. When you're using these impacts, you got to be careful because they're so strong you can snap the bolts. So basically you want to tighten the bands down until the clamp stops moving, but you don't want to go any further. The other note about where you can and can't put things is we're going to be using a lot of self-tapping screws. So when the hoops were built, there were self-tapping screws put into all of the hoops. We had to make sure we put those screws in a place where they weren't going to interfere with the plastic. So with our magnetic fits, we don't want to have any screws going down through the top of it that's going to hit the plastic. So in this case, we put all of the screws through the side. There is the exception when we're putting the plastic attachment channel on that we obviously need to screw through the plastic attachment channel to secure it to the hoops. Alright, so now we're in a position where we've got one whole hoop in, it's anchored on both sides, and we've got the sidewall corner braces in. The straight pipe with the swages are the purlins. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our second hoop up and then sleeve the purlin through those ridge connector pieces. We repeat the process, we put up the second hoop, but in this case there is no corner bracing, so we basically just get it square with the right angle and tighten the end rail clamps. Now that we've got two in, we've got two pieces that we can put that purlin in. So we go ahead, we get that purlin up, we slide it through those connectors, flush it up on the end on this side, and then we put screws up through the connectors so that they're not in the way of anything, they're not going to hit the plastic, and that will lock these hoops in place. An important consideration is trying to get all of your hoop spacing correct. We talked about the spacer board, so it's really easy with a spacer board to go ahead and just put those two notches on the hoops over here to make sure we're maintaining our spacing, and we should do the same thing up top when we're putting that ridge purlin in. So now we're marching down the structure, putting all of our hoops in. When we get to the far end, we might have to cut that purlin piece or cut the swage off the purlin piece. If several domes are getting connected together, you want to keep all the swages so that you can continue to run the purlin down the full length of the building. But if you're stopping, you need to put an end wall in, you might have to cut that pipe or cut the swage off of the pipe. When this is all the way into the other side, the far end also gets the same sidewall corner braces, so each dome will have one in each corner, or 4 in total. And then we can come back in, we can put the ski tips on the front. That's either using the swage with the curved piece, or using a splice to get the ski tip to connect with the non-swaged end of the skid. Again, for the anchoring, we'll slide the brace bands on ahead of time, but each ski tip will get 2 1 3/8 inch brace bands with those welded rings. We'll go ahead and put the T-posts in at the corner to anchor the building, and then we're ready to think about plastic. The building is anchored, all the hoops are together, all of the bracing are in, none of the screws are in the way with the plastic. So the last step before plastic is putting on the plastic attachment channel. We're going to run the plastic attachment channel all the way over the hoop on the ends of each end of the structure. If you have several domes together, you only need it on the first and last hoop. You also could put it on each one of the domes and have several sections of plastic, depending on how you plan to use the structures. So in this case, we'll go ahead and we'll start. We will put the plastic attachment channel all the way down the bottom of the skid. We would start coming up with it. We would flex it with clamps in our hands over the curved piece, run it all the way up to the peak, and then we would go ahead and cut it on this side of the peak, run another piece up and over this way, meeting at the peak. Before we put the plastic on, we're going to want to make sure that we tape all of the sharp edges. So anywhere where you have two pieces of plastic attachment channel coming together, we'll just use a little bit of duct tape and we'll tape those together. After that, you're going to move into the end walls, and then when the end walls are installed, you can go ahead and secure the plastic. We're not going to talk about end walls in this video because there's a couple different options, and we're also not going to talk about skinning the building in this video either, but there's a lot of videos out there that talk specifically about putting plastic on high tunnels and structures like this. So I'm here now with a completed 12 foot by 12 foot unit. We put this unit up about 6 weeks ago, and right after we put it up, we went ahead and planted some of our early basil and some eggplant in here, and that stuff really took off and is looking great. But it kind of shows the simplicity of the design. It is a small unit. This is, again, since it's a 12 foot unit, it's designed for 3 30-inch beds. We have plastic attachment channel on the end walls that go up and over on the first end wall and the last end wall. And then we had multiple people come and we sheeted the plastic. We kind of pulled the center of the tops over and then kind of came down to really try to get out the creases. We can support the bottom of the plastic with sandbags. We can also cinch up the plastic in longer units to get a little bit of ventilation. But the building is so small and the end walls open up so much that we're really not getting any sidewall ventilation or using that for this structure. We have decided to expand this building. One of the great things about these little domes and these little kits is that we can just kind of keep stringing things on and adding different sections. So we have a 35-foot bed system here. So we're going to go ahead, we're actually going to make some 36-foot long units. We're doing that with the buildings behind me. Basically what that is kind of 2 kits that have been kind of squeezed together. So that's actually a 20-foot building that's behind us. This is a 12-foot building, and then to connect the different domes, we just have a simple 4-foot connecting piece that's swaged on one end. So we're still going to have corner bracing in each of the 4 corners of each individual building. So it's kind of like a bunch of small buildings that are strung together by these top pieces. Saves a lot of money because we still have all the mobility associated with the skids. We only have to pay a little bit of money to get the steel and still connect the buildings together, really helping make them a lot more rigid. It also allows us to think about this as instead of a bunch of individual domes when it comes to plastic, we can actually skin the whole entire thing. So we can run plastic lengthwise, and the longer we get, the easier it is to be able to cinch up some of that plastic on the sides. When you've got those longer buildings, ventilation becomes a lot more of a concern. One of the things that I've been taught is that if the width of the building is one number and the length of the building is more than twice that number, that you start having issues with airflow. So for us, a 12-foot wide building, when we start getting longer than about 24 feet, we really got to start thinking about getting some of that sidewall ventilation. Luckily for us, the way that this is designed, the longer it gets, the easier it is to pull the plastic up and get some ventilations from the sides as well. It is possible to install roll bars on these buildings, where instead of the plastic coming down with flaps for sandbags, there can actually be a roll bar on the bottom, and then you can roll up just from the sidewalls or roll it all the way up. Another thing that is out there is actually putting things underneath the plastic if it has roll-up sides. So you could actually have screens like bird screens or something if you're going to grow these in type that you're trying to cover berries from the birds. Or you could actually put row covering underneath it, use it as like a pest barrier as well as a season extension tool, depending on what time of the year you're going to be using the building. You can also see the anchoring kits. The anchoring kits are basically made up of brace bands which go around ski tips, pinch it, and then some welded rings. So we went ahead and put the ski tip in. There's ski tips on both sides of each dome, and it does allow these buildings to actually get dragged. You want to be careful though, because you never want to kind of pinch the tips together by dragging from a single point. If you were going to pull this building by dragging on the skids, you always want to make sure that the direction of the force is along the length of the skids, and then they can come to pulleys or snatch blocks, turn to a single pull point. You don't want to try to pull it with 2 different things. You don't want to try to pull it where you're pinching the end walls together. You always want to make sure that you're pulling the skids directly in the direction that they want to go. So the skids are here. We've got the welded anchors, and then it's really easy to use T-posts. We love them because there's pounders to pound them in, and there's equipment and pullers to pull them right back out again. So since this building is going to get moved around a lot, this is a really simple way to anchor them when we're not worried about any severe weather events or heavy wind situations. You can always think about anchoring these buildings a lot more with twist-in earth augers, cables, turnbuckles, and all the like. But the simplest way to anchor these buildings to make them move easily is every one of the domes will have an anchoring kit with welded rings and T-posts put in and out. I personally like doing both T-posts all the way in. I've seen people just put them on the outside. Again, this is not designed to take any substantial wind, right? So these are just a really simple way to kind of hold it down just for regular day use. We have it on this corner as well and the 4 far corners. So this 144 square feet, or this 12-foot by 12-foot building, is being held down by 8 T-posts. The end wall design on this one is a very, very simple and affordable design. Basically, they're called scissor doors. We go ahead and we put a kind of a hinge on the top that allows some pipes to pivot out from the center, really allowing them to open all the way up. It's also really important with whatever your end wall design is that it can move over or onto low tunnels. Especially when we talk about 15-foot wide versions of these things where you've got 2 low tunnels over 4-foot beds. We want to be able to slide it on and off. So say, for example, you started carrots in here really early where the low tunnel is over the carrots and then the high tunnel or this little dome is over that, and then you want to move it off to use this structure for something else, but the carrots aren't ready yet. You want to be able to move the building off of those tunnels that are already in the ground. Later in the season, you might have something in here like tomatoes, and then next door have some spinach, and what you're going to want to be able to do is actually get the spinach under low tunnels so that it can have more season extension as you need it before the tomatoes are ready. Then when the tomatoes are finally done, you can be sliding the building over the spinach where they're already under low tunnels. So how the end walls and the low tunnels interact is very important if you're using this for vegetable production. These come down and just the same exact plastic attachment stuff. There's plastic attachment channel on the sides with wire inside of that. The one thing I do recommend is that the end wall be a separate piece of plastic from the roof plastic. You want to make sure that you've got a lot of slack up here in the top around the hinge. You really can use foam tape and duct tape to kind of tape the tops of these pivoting units that you're not actually wearing the plastic. But the best way to do that is actually make sure that this is a separate sheet of plastic, leaving some extra material up top so that the thing can move easily without tearing any of the plastic. So there we go. That's the 12-foot by 12-foot dome. And behind us, we're going to be adding another 20 feet, as I said, making this entire unit a 12-foot by 36-foot unit to cover our 35-foot beds. Go over one more minute. Okay. Yeah, stay right there. What?